I'm one of the business skills advisors here at Business West. Sorry. For today's webinar, I'm delighted to be joined by Lucy Smith from Inclusive Change. Inclusive Change is a social enterprise that helps individuals and organisations achieve their potential and success in the workplace by tapping into the power of neurodiversity. Today's session will look at what it means to be neurodiverse, breaking down some of the myths and terminology, and exploring how businesses can support their staff who are neurodiverse. Just a reminder that today's session is being recorded, so all microphones should be muted. Feel free to leave cameras off if you prefer. We'll try to make the session as interactive as possible, and we'll be enabling the chat function so you can ask any questions throughout. We'll try to answer as many of those as we can at the end. And Lucy's contact details will be shared with you before we finish the session today. Next slide, please, Jackie. Perfect, thank you. So just to go through the agenda for today, we will be joined shortly by my colleague Barry, who's just going to run through Workforce for the Future programme for those businesses who aren't already engaged on the programme. We'll then move straight into the main event with Lucy, who will be covering some of the language and definition and terminology in terms of neurodivergence, myths and misconceptions, why and why now, the benefits to business, let's get real, strengths and challenges, and then what's next. For the end of the session, like I say, we'll finish with some Q&As posted from within the chat, so do feel free to kind of add those as we go along the session. I'd now like to hand over to my colleague Barry, who will talk you through the Workforce for the Future programme. Barry, over to you.
Thank you, Fiona. Good morning, everybody. I'm Barry, and as Fiona said, I work in the skills team alongside Fiona. I really don't want to detract too much time from today's topic, but I do need to just give you a brief overview of Workforce for the Future, which brings you this webinar today. If we move on to the next slide, please. So, as this slide depicts, Workforce for the Future is designed to get your business fit for the future by working with you to attract, recruit and retain the workforce for the future. So working with lots of expert partners that together can sort of bring you lots of help and advice to achieve that future proofing. It's for businesses that are small, medium-sized enterprises, so up to 250 employees, and those that are situated in the west of England. So it's tailored support, up to 30 hours, and it runs through to December 23. And it's funded via the West of England Combined Authority, WECA, and European Social Funding. So moving on to the next slide, in essence, what does that mean? So with the support of an experienced skills advisor, and you could be referred to several through the programme, through different partners, it will help you to better understand the emerging needs of your skills, of your workforce, the current ones, the new ones and emerging ones in that particular sector, because things have pivoted an awful lot, as you all know, over the last few years. It'll help you to identify the relevant skills support you need, and programs and training options that are at your disposal. You know, we have the ability to offer you a range of suite of online tools, resources, CPD and workshops like today's as well. So you can really access a wide range of training, and we're linked into the training provider network in the west of England, be it universities, colleges or private training providers. So we're well equipped to be able to look at every need you've got. And it's really to look at how to attract, nurture and sustain talent within your workforce to sort of future-proof you for the years to come. So those of you that are on Workforce for the Future, and I know some of you are already, you've heard this a few times, but those of you that haven't, there will be a link at the end so that you can contact us and learn a little bit more about Workforce for the Future. So thanks very much for listening. As Fiona has said, there's a chat facility, so please put any thoughts, remarks, questions in there, and we will try to endeavour to make sure they're looked at, answered and discussed throughout this programme. So thank you very much. I will now have pleasure to hand you over to Lucy Smith from Inclusive Change. Lucy.
Good morning, how are you? So thank you, Barry and Fiona and Jackie, for that introduction. I'm going to take over now. Hopefully I'll be able to share my screen. So let's do start broadcast. I usually sing to myself as I'm doing this. I don't need to today because it's done it quite quickly. You should have some slides on your screen now where you can see a little animated version of me. It's not really, it's just one I found and I thought, you know what, she'll do for now. I'm going to talk to you for the next sort of 40 minutes or so around neurodiversity, and specifically neurodiversity at work. Barry and Fiona asked me to come and do this session a while back. I've been working with them, and I'm on the Workforce for the Future programme, and I've gained a great deal out of that. But my business is all around thinking about the future of work, and specifically about how we can harness neurodiversity, this phrase, this term, this thing, and make that work for our organisations and support those people who are neurodivergent at work. I'm going to talk about a lot of different things in this session. Just to introduce, I come from an organisation called Inclusive Change, that's mine. I also am the director of a community interest company called Inclusive Change at Work. And as part of this whole project, as part of the work I do, I have a retail outlet called Your Village Shop, which is an autism and dementia friendly shop. So I'll move on to my next slide, which gives you a bit of an introduction. Okay, now I'm going to do a lot of talking. I'm not going to apologize about that. We haven't got much time, and I want to get as much information out to you as possible. But there will be some moments where I will say, can anybody answer, or can anybody tell me something? I won't spoil it, okay? You can do that in the chat, or you can do that by taking your mic off and just shouting out. I may not be able to see you because I can only see my screens at the moment, okay? So we're going to talk about language. Language in the world of neurodiversity is, I'd say it's evolving, and it's something that can be very personal to individuals. So one of the first things I will say is that I may use terms which I reflect with or I align with. I try my very best to use the most up-to-date terminology and things that are sensitive, but I do know that language does matter to individuals too. Myths and misconceptions. I'm a Bristolian, so I find it very difficult to say that word myths without putting 2 Fs on the end of it. We're going to have a little look at what those myths and misconceptions are. I'm going to talk a bit about the business case and why this is so important and why we need to be getting our heads around it, particularly in the world of business. I'm going to talk a bit about those strengths and challenges from both points of view. Talk about it from the point of view of individuals who are neurodivergent, but also from the point of view of an employer or an organisation. So there are some, I am very realistic about this, and I can be all roses and rainbows, but quite honestly, there are some challenges. So let's get real and talk about them. And then I'll talk about what next. But my warning about all of this is a short introductory session. I can talk for hours on each one of the topics that I have listed there, each one of those areas. I can't today, okay? So language, what are we talking about? Now, some of you may have heard different words and different phrases in and around the terms neurodiversity, okay? I have 3 different terms on there. Neurodiversity, which is the natural diversity of human brains. Now, the neurodiversity movement, this element around a social justice movement, and neurodiversity as a term was coined first by a lady called Judy Singer. Now, Judy is autistic herself, and she has an autistic mother and an autistic daughter. So she comes from a completely neurodivergent family. And back in the 90s, she started to write and to propose this idea of we live in a neurodiverse world. And because of that natural diversity of human brains, no 2 of us are the same. Even twins, you will find, are not the same. And so we do need to think about that diversity of thought. Now we're in 2022. She's updated some of her writing about that, so you can find out about Judy online. And the phrases and the terms are starting to gain some traction now. So the neurodiversity paradigm, that philosophy of neurodiversity, is something that perhaps us leaders and managers need to start to think, okay, what does it mean for us? And how do we reflect and how do we look on it? My next slide talks about some more specific and probably more individual terms. Neurodivergent, okay? So as a group, we're all neurodiverse, okay? A group of people with different types of brains, that's a neurodiverse group. Within that group, though, we might find that there are people who are neurotypical, So a person whose brain function is considered, and I hate to use this word, normal, and it does have inverted commas around it. I want to ban normal, because what is normal? And then you have neurodivergent people, and that might be somebody whose brain functions in a different way. And I'm going to talk about some of those neurodivergences and neurodivergent thinking now. So some of the terms that you may have heard before are things like autism. That's usually the term that most people align with neurodivergent thinking. So when we hear the word neurodiversity, quite often, initially people will go straight to thinking about autism, but actually it encompasses a wide range of different conditions and different ways of thinking. So we've got autism, we've got ADHD, we've got some other terms on there like dyslexia. Now, most of you will have heard of dyslexia, but I'm wondering how many of you will have heard of dyscalculia, which is a difficulty around numbers. And that's one that I have trouble with sometimes. Dyspraxia is another area of neurodivergent thinking. Dyspraxia is developmental coordination delay in not the simple way of saying it. In a simple way of saying it, it can be difficulties around movement, coordination, things like riding a bike might be difficult. Things like dance might be difficult for somebody who's dyspraxic. And Tourette's. Tourette's is on there too. Now, Tourette's is a condition that will come with tics, that will generally mean that you will have involuntary movements or tics. They may be verbal, they may be movement, and they're all related to this area that we call neurodivergent thinking. Okay. So I'm going to ask you to open your mics if you want to, or put your hands up and shout out. I will just say I can't see those hands at the moment though. So on this screen, you've got 4 photographs. Can anybody name any of those people? They're generally high profile people that I've got photographs of, and I use these to start to bring to life, okay, you know, this is real life, and these people have different neurodivergent conditions. So can anybody shout out a name or pop a name in the chat?
Has been put in the chat.
I can't see anything in the chat, I'm afraid.
Yes, so Chris comes in there, you see. Richard Branson.
Richard Branson, definitely, yes.
Chris Packham.
Yes, Chris Packham. Any clues on the other 2?
Lucas put Elon Musk.
Elon Musk, yes. And
The Chase lady. The Chase lady.
The Chase lady, Anne Hegarty. Now, does anybody know what their neurodivergent conditions might be?
Chris Packham has a kind of autism. He did a long program on BBC.
He did, and he's very, very. He's a great advocate now. He didn't get diagnosed as autistic until his 40s. So just to move along, we've got Chris Packham, Anne Hegarty from The Chase, and Elon Musk are all autistic. So they're all open and have talked and written about being autistic. Anne Hegarty in particular, I know that she didn't get diagnosed until much later in life, and she actually got her job as the governess on The Chase because she had a social worker who helped her to organise stuff and work out how to do stuff in many different ways, who said there's a job advert here for a person who's a quizzer, somebody who's got great general knowledge and does a lot of quizzing. Why don't you apply for it? So she did, and she got a job. And Richard Branson is dyslexic. So you've got a number of different faces on there with different neurodivergent conditions. Now, for the benefit of time, I will talk through some of these now. So on this page, you've got Jamie Oliver, then you've got Ajoa Ando, you've got Will.i.am and Emma Watson. Now, 2 of them have the same condition, which is ADHD. So Will.i.am has ADHD, as does Emma Watson. The other two, Jamie Oliver is dyslexic, and Joa Ando is dyspraxic, and she's recently talked about dyspraxia, meaning that she will probably never be on Strictly Come Dancing because she doesn't have the coordination skills, and it takes her a long time to be able to coordinate if she needs to dance. And dyspraxia is kind of the little known neurodivergence that not everybody talks about. And then my final page is 3 dyslexics and an ADHDer. We have Tom Cruise, Holly Willoughby, and we have Michael Phelps with all his medals, and Maggie Adarin Pocock. So Michael Phelps has ADHD, and the other 3 are dyslexics. Now, one of the reasons I show these images and put these up are to say, do you know what? These are successful people who have overcome challenges, who have a neurodivergence, but they are top of their game. And many, many neurodivergent people who aren't in the public eye are top of their game. So a little bit now about the business case, okay? So the reasons why I think that this is important, okay? So the CIPD estimates that 10% of the UK are neurodivergent. If we think of that in terms of numbers, that's 6 million people in the UK are neurodivergent. 1 in 100 people are on the autistic spectrum. Now, I'm going to have a little bit of beef with these statistics, and I always argue about statistics when I do a presentation with them in that those statistics, I think, are well out of date and probably not reflective of actual autistic people within our world. More recent statements do suggest that 1 in 30 people are autistic, and actually 1 in 38 children are diagnosed as autistic at school. And there's a point I will make about that in a moment. So at least 1 in 15 people are thought to be dyspraxic, and the worldwide prevalence of ADHD is estimated at around 3.4% in adults. There is a lot in the news at the moment, and I follow a lot around women being diagnosed as with ADHD in later life, and particularly now, because the signs and the behaviours and the issues around ADHD haven't come out to the front, and they've managed to cope in life, but have we're just starting to see lots more women being diagnosed with ADHD. Now, back to the business case bit again here. Only 22% of autistic adults are in any paid employment, compared with almost 80% of non-disabled people. That is a generalization on that almost 80%. But 77% of unemployed autistic people say they want to work. Now, the 22% comes from the Office of National Statistics. The ONS has now begun to collect data around autistic adults in the working community or workforce. And it's so important because it starts to give a voice and starts to provide evidence that autistic and neurodivergent adults are not being catered for in the workplace sometimes. More evidence to back that up is that 1 in 10 organisations have a neurodiversity policy. That's just 1 in 10. But 72% of HR professionals said that consideration of neurodiversity was not included in their people management practices. Now, bringing this back to workforce for the future, if we think about those children that are in secondary school now, maybe 11 years old, okay, they're going to be entering the workplace in around about 7 years' time, yeah, depending on what their choices might be. In around about 15 years' time, they're going to be in their mid-20s, and they're going to be enjoying their careers, hopefully, and developing their skills, etc., moving up into management. More and more young people coming into the workforce who are neurodivergent are A, going to expect things to be a bit different, but B, we're missing out on a massive talent pool if we don't think about neurodiversity within our people management practices. So that bit over. I do want to say just just something around the way we think about neurodiversity and what our biases and our attitudes might lead us to believe sometimes, because of the way in which we have found information, or the way in which we've interacted with people who might be neurodivergent. So for years, it was considered something to be fixed or eradicated. You know, even now, and particularly in the United States, I see a lot around, you know, making children fit to the neurotypical way of working and thinking, and I find that very difficult personally. But more recently, I am seeing a more positive approach. And if we consider something called the social model of disability, we may be able to create more impactful outcomes in the workplace. Now, something I will say at this point is that I have a very personal reason for working in this area and for creating my business around this area, in that I have 2 teenagers who are 15 and 14 who are both neurodivergent. They're both autistic. They both also have co-occurring conditions that mean that they do need extra support in different things. And I truly believe that if we can make a difference for the next generation, then we will A, be able to reach and get into that talent pool, but B, make a big difference for young people in the workforce or coming into the workforce in the future. I'll just stop there for a moment in case there are any questions or anything in the chat, because I can't see that, unfortunately, in the way that I've got my screen configured. So I'll just check in to see if there's anything that anybody would like to add or say at this moment, and I'll stop talking for a few seconds.
Thanks, Lucy. Nothing in the chat at the moment, but you know, okay, if anyone wants to unmute, are the slides being shared? Yes, that will be shared at when we finish the presentations.
May I just ask one quick question, please?
Yeah, of course you can.
And thank you. What about Down's syndrome?
So I don't always talk about Down syndrome in terms of neurodivergence, because, and I have a very close experience with Down syndrome. I grew up with my uncle, who's now in his 50s, who is Down's. And when he was diagnosed as Down's, and that was enough. Thank you very much, Mother. We don't need to tell you anything else, and you don't need to think about it. But more and more nowadays, I'm meeting Down's individuals and children and adults who are Down's and autistic. And I think that there might well be a distinction between somebody who's Down's but not autistic, and Down's and autistic. In terms of the terminology, Down's isn't always, and I haven't seen it included within the neurodivergent conditions, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be included. And that's why in a moment, I'll talk about the social model of disability, where actually your diagnosis or your condition is not the important bit. The important bit is the barriers that are in place that we need to remove for anybody. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just talk a little bit about the Equality Act. And again, for the sake of time, I can't go into a lot of detail, but everything that we do in terms of disability does tend to lend itself to come back to the Equality Act, okay? And so it's important to mention that this act protects against disability discrimination. You do not need a diagnosis, okay? Under the Equality Act, a person is disabled if they have a physical or mental impairment which has a substantial and long-term adverse effect on their ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. As I say, I can talk a long time on this topic, just this topic alone. And there are things to think about in terms of whether or not somebody has disclosed to you, whether or not as a leader or a manager or as an employer, you recognize that there might be neurodivergence, and that might be a reason behind performance issues. And so the Equality Act is a very important piece of legislation that protects against that disability discrimination. So some of the myths and misconceptions. Now, there are a ton of myths in terms of specific conditions, okay? So things like making eye contact is difficult for autistic people. Yes, it is, but actually some people have trained and made themselves give eye contact because that's what we expect in terms of social norms. When you're going into a job interview, one of the tick boxes quite often is made great eye contact, or lack of eye contact might be a negative. But actually making eye contact can be something that is very difficult. That's a specific myth in terms of a specific condition. But here I've got some generic myths. So things like neurodiverse people have learning difficulties. Not always. In some of the images that I've shown you earlier, I'd probably say that Elon Musk doesn't have a learning difficulty. But there may be different ways in which you process the world and process information that make your way of learning and your style of learning different to other people. Neurodiverse people have communication difficulties. Not always. I have two children, one who is an introvert and prefers not to communicate with people and has selective mutism. My younger son is an incredible extrovert and actually has fantastic communication skills. Neurodiverse people can't work independently. Absolutely not at all. That's wrong. I work as well as an associate trainer for an organization called the Curly Hair Project. My boss is a lady called Alice Rowe. She's autistic. She works completely independently. She is a business owner, content creator, general Wonder Woman, and works very much independently. Neurodivergent people have little chance of success at work. Absolutely not. Just think of those images I showed you earlier. Would you say that Will.i.am or Emma Watson have little chance of success at work? Not at all. And neurodivergent people are best suited to repetitive, simple work. Not at all, again. In fact, if you're ADHD, it may be that you thrive in an environment where you can mix and match and do lots of different things and move from one idea to another idea and generate that creativity and ideas in general. Those are some generalizations. They are not they're not what everybody thinks, but they are some of the myths that we do come across in terms of neurodivergence. So I touched upon this idea of something called the social model of disability. So when we think about difference and when we think about disability, or we think about equality and diversity, we will often find that society creates barriers. Now, in the workplace and in organizations, those barriers are generally around three key areas. The environmental barriers. So an environment might be inaccessible. If you're thinking about physical disability, that's quite easy to see. But if you're thinking about neurodivergence, that might be around an environment being a very noisy environment. That might make it inaccessible to somebody who's autistic and is sensitive to noise. So thinking about your buildings, but even language and the services or the communication, the manner of communication that we have with our customers and our clients or our service users. Then we've got barriers around attitudes. Now, this goes back to something I said earlier around our cognitive bias and our experiences in life and what we've experienced, and whether somebody has prejudice, discrimination, or we see stereotyping. I have had conversations with business owners in organizations, and I see this still happening where it's, well, we employed an autistic person once and that didn't quite work for us. So yeah, maybe not. We're individuals and we cannot stereotype like that in terms of neurodivergence. So not every person with ADHD is energetic and chaotic all of the time. Not every person who's autistic has poor eye contact and doesn't like to socialize. Completely stereotyping. And then we've got organizational barriers. So whether we're inflexible, whether our procedures are a barrier or our policies are barriers. But removing those barriers can benefit everyone. So if you want to go along this path and start looking at neurodiversity within your people management strategy, I would start with these barriers and look at how you can remove those barriers for everyone. But I do want to talk now about the strengths of neurodivergent individuals. So we're going to talk a bit about strengths and some of the challenges in a moment. And some of the strengths on here are about that ability to make attention to detail. I've just spoken about my my boss Alice at the Curly Hair Project. Her attention to detail is incredible. I'm not a details person, and I will send her stuff and she'll go, no, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And she will pick out the tiny details that I don't see. And I really value that. Generally, being curious and questioning, why do I have to do that? My son in himself, he questions everything, my 14-year-old. Things like he'll wear old socks and we'll say, do you not have a pair of socks, or at least two that might look the same? And he'll say, what's so special about matching socks anyway? And he will challenge everything. Why do I have to do it that way? Why don't we do it this way? And even in the workplace, I have a member of staff who's dyslexic, and she will come up with ideas in our workplace that nobody else has thought of that just benefit us all. Being loyal, innovative, creative, and being great communicators are some of those strengths of neurodiverse individuals, or neurodivergent, sorry. I've put on there around being empathetic and actually being able to be very sensitive to other people's feelings sometimes, even if you don't communicate that you are that empathetic. Actually, you can be too empathetic sometimes. And then we've got things like hyperfocus and being able to focus on a task or a job to the extent that everything else goes out the window. I had put anxiety on there, but that actually should come on the next slide. So I can see my attention to detail. My attention to detail, not very good here. If I'd have sent this to somebody for proofreading, they'd have picked it up, because you can see it's in the same place on this slide. I'll always fess up to my mistakes, I will say. So in terms of challenges in the workplace, you will generally find that you might have challenges around things like managing transitions. Transitions are those periods of change. Now, they can be small periods or small changes. They can be really big changes. My background is in organizational transformation and change management. And helping people manage change in a big way are the things that I do in terms of my professional world. However, just managing change, for instance, moving from a piece of work that you're hyper-focused in, imagine going through some data manipulation or data analysis, and you're hyper-focused in this, and then, oh, crikey, I've got to go to a meeting. Oh, I've got a webinar in 5 minutes, or I had a webinar start 5 minutes ago. Managing that transition out of that hyper-focus and that piece of work into another activity or another environment can be a challenge sometimes. And so we need to think about that, because it can bring on some overwhelm. It can bring on ways in which you might find it difficult to regulate and might need some support in terms of doing that. Physical activities. If you're dyspraxic, you might find some physical activities difficult. Concentration. If you've got ADHD and your concentration is not on par that day, then being able to concentrate for periods of time on a topic that you're perhaps not focused on at that moment will be difficult. Communication, and that can work both ways. You might find somebody who's neurodivergent finds it difficult to talk and can be non-verbal or selective mute or elective mute. But the other hand could be that they are always talking and distract other people. And actually, this is where one of the difficulties about neurodivergence in the workplace can come across, can arise, where you've got multiple neurodivergent people within an organization and within an environment working together, and we have to manage the needs of everybody. That's a challenge, not one that I can answer here. You've also got challenges around things like sensory experiences, socializing, and executive function. But the big one, even though it's quite small on there, are challenges around anxiety. And anxiety will usually be the sign that you see that somebody's struggling if they are neurodivergent and something's not quite right in the workplace. Strength or weakness, I'm just going to cover very quickly whether or not we see something as a strength or a weakness. So for instance, autism can be lack of eye contact, but can also be noticing patterns that nobody else has seen. ADHD could be chaotic, but it can also be hyper-focus and getting twice as much done as everybody else. Dyslexia can be spelling mistakes, but it can also be different concepts, ideas, and viewpoints that you hadn't previously considered. So just thinking about this in a different way, if we always recruit in our own image, if we always think about the same kind of people coming to work for us, we might not get these differences, and we might not get that strength that can be brought to us in the workplace. There are some challenges though for employers, and I'm not going to sugarcoat things, that there are attitudes again and ways of thinking about things that mean, oh, I'm not sure about this, or you want to do something and you're really up for it, but you've got to persuade others, or you don't know where to start. That's the big challenge sometimes, is I don't know where to start and I'm afraid of getting it wrong. So I've got that on there. The lack of understanding about different topics and different conditions, but we can't know everything about everyone, which is why sometimes I come back to that social model where we can think about the barriers and perhaps devise our understanding and training around that. Reasonable adjustments. Are they going to cost more? Is it going to be difficult to put in place? If I do it for one person, have I got to do it for everyone? Those are some of the questions that come up sometimes for employers. Not knowing how to meet needs, not sure how to run a recruitment process. Then you think as well, oh, well, maybe somebody I employ might need more time off. Parents, for instance, of neurodivergent children do have those caring responsibilities. I'm a carer for 2 children and a mother-in-law. Plus I run my own business. I very rarely take time off. Parents who are carers do work incredibly hard and are incredibly loyal in jobs that are flexible for them. I'll just take a moment there to take a second and see if there's anything in the chat or any questions, as I've got a few more minutes left for the last few slides. So I'm going to stop talking for a moment. I can hear somebody. No, it's okay. Right, if there are no questions or there's...
I'm just looking now, Lucy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's just a statement or question. I work at Access Creative College in Bristol. We work with neurodivergent students that study creative subjects such as graphic design, games and technology, music, software, technology and media. I'm looking to get them valuable work experience placements and forward. So I think it's an amazing session, and I think it's opening everybody's eyes, I think, and awareness to this. So and again, I think there'll be some follow-ups. So a bit more of a statement than the question, but yeah, no, I think
brilliant. I'm really pleased to hear that. And my company, Inclusive Change at Work Community Interest Company, our reason for setting that up is that we aim to create work experience opportunities for neurodivergent young people from the age of 13 upwards, as I strongly believe if we can support neurodivergent teenagers to understand and advocate for themselves and understand how they can operate in a workplace or in enterprise and in self-employment, they will have better employment outcomes past the age of 18. But I can talk about that again for hours on another session, but I won't right now. But if you want to get in touch with me, please do. So just some of those benefits of a neurodiverse workplace, okay? So thinking about everybody, and we're all neurodiverse, a group of people is neurodiverse, the workplace being neurodiverse, well, hey, equality, diversity and inclusion brings a whole host of benefits, and so does diversity of thought, okay? I've even got my sofa there with my hybrid home worker on the sofa clicking away. We've got things like an enhanced reputation. If you're an organisation and you are embracing neurodiversity, you've taken people on your customers, you are providing services that show that you understand neurodiversity, you are going to have an enhanced reputation, okay? You are going to have increased employee engagement because you are showing that you care, you value, and this means something to you. Increased productivity. I mentioned earlier about highly productive individuals. We're all individual. We all have our personality traits. Some of us might be lazy. Some of us might be hardworking. But generally, Hewlett-Packard, data that's come out from Hewlett-Packard, who have an autism recruitment program, okay, specifically around autism. The teams that are neurodivergent and staffed mostly by neurodivergent individuals are 30 to 50% more productive than other teams doing the same job who aren't a neurodiverse group. Just think about it, okay? You've got talent pipeline identification. So right back at the beginning, I gave you that business case and I was talking about the numbers and the number of young people that are going to be coming through into the workforce in the next 7 to 10 years. That's a big talent pool, okay? We need to tap into it and we need to find ways of recruiting them and getting them into the workforce so that they stay in the workforce. Staff development, providing mentoring opportunities, providing training opportunities, staff awareness, understanding, and actually growing your staff knowledge and training through neurodiversity training, a great way to look at staff development. You've got improved diversity outlook. Generally, reports and research I see that demonstrates innovation and creativity, just different ways of thinking. It's incredible to come up with those different ways of thinking. And the last one on there I have around business growth. Okay, there's this thing called the purple pound. The purple pound is effectively the disabled pound, okay? We've got the grey pound and the pink pound, and it's all kind of phrases and sound bites and words that we quite often hear. But that industry or that audience and community is worth billions, okay? As a niche, as an area, as a group of people who align with values and really appreciate and will be incredibly loyal to you if you serve them well, will increase your business growth. I won't dwell too long on this slide. I will simply read this one out, okay? But building understanding builds tolerance. So you've got reduced attrition, reduced sickness, and reduced grievances. Helping people to feel more comfortable talking about neurodiversity in a well-informed manner naturally leads to a more welcome environment for everyone. Basic etiquette and the use of appropriate language, respecting individual needs without belittling or isolating, leads to an inclusive workforce where everyone feels valued. And sensitivity to neurodivergence when planning and allocating work, tasks, or projects can optimize productivity and reduce anxiety. That's getting into this to the nitty gritty there, I would say, and there are whole swathes of work we can do around that. And understanding and awareness of the neurodiversity paradigm, I mentioned that right at the beginning, enables leaders and managers to remove those barriers to recruitment, progression, and the retention of neurodivergent staff. Again, it's all part of that business case. So to round up, tips and advice, okay. I would always advocate starting at the top. If you can make a commitment or you get your bosses or your leadership to make a commitment, we need to get that from the top, okay? Quite often, change does happen when somebody from within an organization feels so passionately about it that you persuade and you negotiate and you encourage those at the top to start advocating or to support that change. As a change manager, I know how to make that happen, and I know the ways in which we can do those kind of things. Usually it's about sheer persuasion. But starting at the top is my top tip. Identify what you want to achieve. So why does neurodiversity matter to your business or your organization? It's back to those benefits I showed just a few moments ago. Why is it important for you? Is it about your social responsibility? Is it about a business decision and a business strategy in order to work with, tap into, whatever? Is it about reflecting the diversity of our own communities and you feel that actually this is so important, we need to make that change? For me, it's a very, very personal passion, and you can probably tell that by the way I talk about things. But that is why it's important for me. A practical tip is around starting a neurodiversity network. So champion from within. If you're in an organization where you could start that network and you could be part of one and pull people together, do it. I'd say set goals, but be realistic, because we can't fix everything all by ourselves, but we can do if we combine and we work together. I'd also say find your experts. There are a lot of people now working within the neurodiverse community. I know them, see them, interact with them. I'm one of them. But if you need to reach out, find experts who can support you, who can help you, who can advise you. There is a phrase of nothing to us without us. I think I've got that the right way around. And I think it's very, very important that the neurodivergent community is a big part of making this change happen for the future. So I've literally just about managed to do it within my time. I'm just a couple of minutes over. Here's me. I run consultancy, training and support. My email is lucy@inclusivechange.co.uk. And I want to say a big, big thank you. I will also say, because I'll always put a plug in there for the work that I do, we've all got to pay the mortgage after all. If you're ready for more, I run training at an organisation called the Curly Hair Project. And I have a session in April all about autism in the workplace, which is an animation video and discussion, all created by Alice, the lady I spoke about earlier, who is autistic herself. So to that end, I'm going to go back. I'll leave my email up there and I will take a breath and say thank you very much. Any questions?
Lucy, I'm looking at the chat and a couple of people have shared some experiences and statements, so I'll just run through those, which I think will be interesting.
I'm going to come back to you as well. I'm going to take my slides off and I'll come back so I can see you all.
Brilliant.
Cool. There we go.
Okay. Right. Chris has put a statement in the chat. I run a model making company, has a large number of dyslexic staff. Sorry, I've lost my chat now. Hold on. When that's it. Here we go. Dyslexic members of staff. It's something we're very proud of. The way people with this dyslexia are wired makes them great as creatives and problem solvers. I am now looking at the barriers that hinder the addition. Looking at barriers that hinder the addition of people with autism and ADHD. Challenges include safety in the workshop, environmental noise, machinery, and stressful deadlines.
Brilliant. I agree with you completely, Chris, around the innovation and creativity. I think in terms of barriers that might hinder, it's often useful to think to look at those barriers with an individual rather than being generic. Because, for instance, my two sons, one would cope with a noisy environment and the other one wouldn't. But they're both autistic, and so they both have different experiences in terms of their sensory processing. But fantastic to think of you looking at that and actually making those differences. Brilliant.
A message from Paula. Paula, would you like to unmute to talk about your statement, or are you happy for me to read through?
That's okay. That's okay, Paula. No problem. I totally understand. Do you know what, Paula? I meet a lot of late diagnosed autistic women. Okay. So in running the training that I do for the Curly Hair Project, I've been doing it online for 2 years, but prior to that, I had 2 or 3 years of doing it face to face. And the amount of women I meet who say, I didn't realize that I was different. I don't consider myself disabled. I feel normal. Absolutely, because this is your normal and it's absolutely validated and totally amazing. But it can be that you find some things more difficult sometimes. And so, as you said, you've had to work harder to fit in to what's expected. Sometimes I do think, why do we expect it? But you've always worked successfully and consider your traits to be a superpower and not a disability. I agree, absolutely. Hyperfocus means I spot things others don't. And my attention to detail means things we deliver that have had every eventuality thought through. Yes, you're like Alice, my boss. She is remarkable. She's a Wonder Woman. My mind sees things so black and white, helps cut through the stuff. I would use another word. My colleagues tie themselves in knots with sometimes. Absolutely. Again, my children will do that for me. I will quite often go to them with a really sticky problem, and they will say, Mum, it's either this or this. Stop fussing about it and just get on with it. And they are so clear and so brilliant at doing that. I run a property business with a neurotypical person, and we have all bases covered. Absolutely. And happy to answer any questions of people who might fear with working with somebody with my label. You're amazing, Paula. Just reading that, you are fantastic. Absolutely brilliant. I felt different, but I thought I was broken. I'm going to cry now. I've got goosebumps, okay? And I do get this a lot in most of my sessions. I realize I'm not a broken normal person, but an exactly true to type autistic person. You are not the first person that has said that to me. It's yeah. Thank you too. Should we all just take a moment there, because for people to come out and disclose and say those things in a public forum, I think you're amazing, and role models who can and show that positivity are what we need to take forward. So thank you on that note. That is incredibly powerful for you to do. And I completely get the I'm too shy, which is why we ask you to do it in the chat. No need to put cameras and microphones on ever at all. Thank you.
So thank you. This has been a really interesting session, and I think it's kind of been really thought-provoking for a lot of people. Quick question that I have, we talked about the talent and the potential talent out there of people who are neurodivergent. Do you have any top tips for businesses about what they can think about when thinking about their recruitment processes?
So it can become quite detailed, but one of the first things to think about are looking at your recruitment process. What do you write in your job adverts and your job descriptions? Are you putting words in there that might put somebody off because they don't have great communication skills, or they're not flexible, or that's one of the first things I would say. I'd also say, have a think about your actual processes and what you ask candidates to do when they're coming to interview or to apply with you. I run interviews in a slightly different way, in that I don't bring people into a room and sit with them at your village shop, for instance, or Inclusive Change. I'm very lucky because I've got an environment that I can take them for a walk around, and we go for a walk and we talk and walk, which means that we stand side by side, and you're not looking at me in the eye. We're just talking about general, about bits and pieces. I would also say, think about things like, how about sending the questions to an interview for an interview candidate before the interview? By doing that, you're allowing somebody to process and think about those questions rather than putting them on the spot, which in an interview process is difficult for anyone anyway. But is there a reason why we can't send those interview questions to somebody? So those are a few tips that I would put in terms of recruitment.
Great stuff, thank you. I think obviously we've talked about today that this was really like an introduction to it, and you could talk for hours about this and kind of go into different kind of sections of it. If anybody does want to link in with Lucy, obviously Lucy's email address is on the screen, lucy@inclusivechange.co.uk. Again, if anybody is interested in kind of learning more about Workforce for the Future programme, you can contact us at skills@businesswest.co.uk. Thank you everybody for attending today, and thank you again, Lucy, for hosting. Our next webinar that Business West are running as part of the programme will be on the 24th of March. It's a workshop that's slightly longer. So I believe, Barry, correct me if I'm wrong, is it 10 till 1?
10 o'clock to 1 o'clock, yes, interactive workshop. Yeah. It is online, but it's a doing one as well. So there'll be lots of activity and to sort of raise this sort of awareness as well.
Okay, so the next one is about promoting the well-being of your workforce, so more about kind of mental health. Again, thank you everyone for attending today. Again, thanks to Lucy, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Bye.